Hey, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. Welcome back to another episode of Honest Conversations with Mo, the Mo Love podcast. Um, Hope everyone's doing well. We got this snowy weather outside that seems like it's still pouring down out here. So hopefully everyone, is warm, safe. But get right into this episode. I want to talk about how we look at security and security in the sense of how, you know, being secure is sexy, but, it's definitely something that's hard to maintain. And I mean, in the sense that, we're always looking for something that's, kind of that safety and reliability, in the world that, leads to, less drama in our lives and something that keeps us emotionally regulated, whether that's, through, our work, through, relationships, uh, just life in general. And when I think about, how being secure is sexy, because I think it's something it's really something that's tough to manage, especially when looking into, especially when looking into relationships that it's easy when we feel secure that, it can become boring. I know for myself, I can easily, become bored. Just in general with things, and especially, when it comes to, a partnership. And I'd say that in a sense because maybe it wasn't, exciting enough, or, I think I talked about it, in the last episode. We talk about, our, dating traumas, and, how that kind of, seeps into, kind of what we're looking for. And when we think of, being secure, it's tough because it's like, dang, it's something that feels so elusive, and like, yeah, we want that, but it's so hard to maintain because it requires, that constant work, whether it's, we're, working on, achieving our dreams. You think of, um, I think of it today, the matchup between AJ DeBance and dang, I'm blanking on his name, Peterson, though, from Kansas. So BYU Kansas matchup earlier today. But you look at those two guys, and the work that they put in to get to where they're at, and that sense of security and knowing that they put the work in to maintain their skill sets, that or their level of ability to know that. I mean, essentially, those are two guys that we're talking about, top two in the NBA draft this upcoming year. And I think when it becomes difficult is when we feel lost in, that sense of security, that sense that, you know, because security requires, that consistent effort, requires constant effort. And when we lack that consistent effort, it's tough to feel like, oh, is this worth sustaining? And I think that's the thing about security, and why it's so sexy, but so difficult to maintain, because we have to continuously do, that personal work for ourselves and within ourselves. And it's something that a sense of security that's certainly earned. And I look at that in the sense of how are we choosing, to react to things? How are we being, emotionally, aware of, kind of, is this a sense of security that we, feel like we want and desire, or is this something that we feel like it's not worth maintaining to as well? And I think that's the thing about security, is not just that it's just something, you have to be gung ho about and, jump into. It's something that you got to willingly to be honest with yourself and be like, hey, is this worth putting that active effort into? Whether, as I said, chasing your dream, is that something that you feel like is worth putting the consistent practice in to, get better day in and day out, to become better? Or, when it comes to a partnership that you feel like is worthwhile, are you willing to put in that actual effort to, sustain that? I think it's also hard, and as I mentioned earlier, that, that boring trap, how it's easy to get so bored with the monotony of things that it becomes so difficult because looking into the next area of, how we allow, as I talked about in the last episode, kind of lust and, kind of that allure, that instant attraction and kind of fuel us kind of early on, kind of all the things that we do. And especially looking at it from a romantic sense of how we allow those those high speed moments to fuel us and feel like, hey, this is something that's intense, that's feels like, oh, this is healthy for us, but maybe it's not healthy because security isn't gonna look you know intense all the time. It's not gonna be something that is instant, of course. It doesn't provide that instant gratification, and I think that's why it's so difficult to maintain that when we get into that notion of just getting caught up in how we, are attributing, attraction for ourselves. How are we feeding that part of ourselves that isn't isn't content with, that instant gratification, that isn't dwelling on, what could be, where I think when it comes to, security, it's allowing it to, prolong over time. How are you doing the necessary work to prolong it, to make it worthwhile, to make it seem like something that's sustainable. And I think that's the thing that we struggle with, and I can admit for myself, certainly I struggle with, that sustainability piece in terms of where when when you know what you kind of want, it kind of gets blindsided by what you feel like, you definitely need, and I think when we forget the things we need, that, we get down on ourselves and we feel like, oh, it's not worthwhile versus, you know, doing the things that, you know, doesn't that isn't always flashy, isn't always the the easiest thing. It's having, those hard conversations, not only with yourself, but with, others in the sense of, whether you are, in a relationship, whether, it's at work and professionally, whether, it's personally with, family and friends. It's just knowing what makes you feel secure. And I think when we know what makes us feel secure, it's easier to have those hard conversations, not only with ourselves, but with others. And I think when we are fed up or fed by the, that adrenaline rush and are really just, pushing ourselves to feed into kind of this narrative that, we concocted in our heads that seems like, oh, this is what security might look like. I think that goes into, I want to segue into the next thing of how we often let our dating patterns, show up, as, trauma repetition. And I mean that in the sense of the people we are looking to date are feeding into, the different trauma patterns that we are constantly, in a constant cycle of. And I can, for myself, I can say, those patterns appear for me in the sense of, I know like for myself, and I think I've always mentioned on this show, I'm a perfectionist. I, try to be the best version of myself, and knowing I'm also, in a sense, also looking for this idealized, perfect version of, a partner. And I know that's something that obviously is not saying that it's not necessarily attainable. Obviously, in a way it is a bit unrealistic, but it's something that if constantly am, looking to master this perfect person, I'm, not able to, see the good in others. And, when I, get caught up in, a small flaw that instantly obviously turns me off. And I think, th- that sense of, trying to master something, or even in the sense of trying to master, those traumas that we feel like, all right, it's now this time, I won't, fall victim to it. And we're trying to get over, that hurdle finally, but we keep, falling and landing, flat on our face. And I also add on how we, reenact those, early childhood traumas, different, whether different types of, mental, emotional, different types of abuses that we've inflicted on ourselves that we feel like we have to keep suffering through it. And I think, like, for me, I can say that's, just the sense of, how I oftentimes confuse, pain with love. I feel like love is something that I feel like, it's got to be something I got to achieve, I got to accomplish. And that if I don't go through some sense of suffering, then is it, worthwhile? Is it feel like it's something that, "Oh, okay, I did enough to earn this," And I feel like obviously it doesn't have to be like that because we don't have to feed into that notion that, you know, pain equates to love, And, say that for myself in the sense of how do I, work through that pattern for sure. And then lastly, just in the sense of just, how are we managing to, engage in these, say repetitive, different cycles. And I think just how we kind of go about breaking that cycle for sure with ourselves is just knowing, obviously knowing what we want, what we deserve, and what security looks like for us is obviously fundamental and key for sure. But also say just knowing how to heal for sure. Heal those wounds not only, for ourselves, but by forgiving ourselves, but also just allowing ourselves to forgive others in the sense that they're not instantly, coming to harm us. Like I I think to, something I struggle with, like I struggle with, getting a compliment. And it seems so minute in the sense of, because, like when I get a compliment, I feel like I'm instantly, instead of just receiving it and allowing, myself to, sit with that compliment, I instantly, give a compliment back or feel like I gotta over explain and not feeling, necessarily worthy of, even like a simple compliment. So I even look at it in the sense of like that. How are we, rewiring ourselves to be better versions of ourselves and feel whole and healthy with who we are. And I think that's the thing too when it comes to, those dating patterns. Obviously, if you consistently are living in that cycle of trauma and not feeling healed, you're going to consistently, run into the same scenarios when it comes to dating, and you won't be able to find that person that may be truly meant for you because you're still you're still running into this, consistent cycle, and you feel like, all right, maybe this person could be, the person, you know, uh, feels exciting, but that was just, like I think I also mentioned, in the last week's episode, just in terms of uh how we look at or how I look at, relationships in the sense of, I was always, allowed myself to feed into, chaotic, unhealthy connections because, like I said, it was exciting. It was something that felt like, oh, that that sense of uh, looking to, accomplish something or get over this hurdle, and knowing now that I do, want something healthy, want something stable, want something that's not chaotic. And knowing just in terms of what security actually looks like for me, these days is very fundamental, in all aspects. And, I'm not just saying, just when it comes to dating or relationships, but in all aspects, what does security look like? What does, healthy connection, with family and friends look like? What does career progression looks like, professionally? What does it look like personally as well? And I think just how I show up for myself is important too, to how I'm secure for me. And I think it's important to know how you're showing up for you. And I think when we're when we're struggling, I'd say when we're struggling with it, how do how do you self-regulate? How do you not fall back into, those repetitive, cycles and, you know, get back on track, get back to, the version of you that you want to be, and who you need to be for you. And I think that's important because, every day, you're gonna go through the ups and downs of life. I mean, as I said, kind of the top of this episode, I mean, we're, currently going through, the snowstorm, and you're like, dang, how do I, knowing, unable to, really go out as much and things like that, but how am I, keeping myself occupied? How am I, finding ways to still maintain my routine, things of that nature. And I think it's just knowing, knowing what secure looks like for you. And I know I could constantly, keep repeating that, but I think it's just prioritizing that healthy sense of attachment for yourself and, being secure in yourself. And it certainly, trust me, it's not something I've mastered perfected. Trust me, I'm tried and no, obviously it's not something that's attainable as far as perfection. But I think when we know we feel secure, we know it in our whole being. And it's not something that just, is fleeting, in the moment because it's something that we know that we're putting in that consistent grind and effort to to hold on to it and to let it happen to us too. And I think that's the thing too is that when we allow it to happen for us and we don't feel like it's just something that can obviously something that can certainly go away in a blink. That's why I said it's it's hard to maintain because if you aren't willing to put that work in, it's just gonna be gone like with anything. And it's it's something that like I put it, it's just something that it's like it may not seem that it's there easily, obviously, but it's like how am I doing things that are necessary to maintain this? And I think that's the most important and vital part when we think about it for ourselves. And even going back to that sense of our our trauma patterns, how we're constantly in those cycles. How do we how are we going about breaking those cycles? Um, not only as I said, I think I used of course spoke on it in terms of the sense of dating, but also for ourselves, how we're breaking, these cycles for us with ourselves. And I think it's doing the work to know ourselves. And I think it goes back to, that self-regulation and knowing how are you, regulating yourself and doing the things that allow us to show up for ourselves day in and day out. And then from there, I want to segue into how last night Unrivaled made history, selling out. Oh wow, why am I blanking? The stadium in Philly, but in Philadelphia, first appearance in Philadelphia, but they had a sold out crowd. Obviously 76ers arena, but sold out crowd of 21,000 plus. Selling out for not only just unrivaled, but even in for the WNBA in that sense as well. It being a sold out arena. In Philadelphia last night, and it just goes to show what Unrivaled is building as they continue to grow and evolve, not only as a brand, but what is showing is possible for the W in that sense. What what really what's really achievable, with what where women's sports is going for sure. And I think Unrivaled is showing it obviously WNBA still, in CBA talks with the WNBA PA, not much traction being made there. But yeah, Unrivaled made history, and the W's gotta be aware that women's sports is growing. It's got its core fandom, and I think allowing the league to not build on this momentum and build traction from how where women's basketball is growing and evolving into is definitely gonna be hurtful, not only to to their brand, but I think just knowing the true value that these players provide and bring, that they deserve to be paid their worth. And I think it's important that they properly get compensated. Obviously, we're going to continue to monitor the the negotiations with the WNBA and WNBA PA regarding the CBA. But hey, Rob showed yesterday with 21,000 plus that obviously I think Philly will be an expansion team in 2030 within the WNBA. But hey, the game is growing. I mean, so many different markets uh, to potentially tap into in the future as well that shows this. But yeah, WNBA's gotta get on it and properly, pay their players what they're worth for sure. Next, I want to get into Super Bowl 60 preview. Obviously, we just had the AFC and NFC Championship game where the Seahawks came out from the NFC side and the Patriots won the AFC Championship. And we'll, of course, have Super Bowl 60 next Sunday between the Patriots and Seahawks. But my initial thoughts, just following, of course, the AFC and NFC Championship game. Uh, that Seahawks defense is dominant. It's incredible. I think as long as Sam Darnold can do what needs to be done and, take care of the football, which I admit I was surprised that he did that in that Rams game against the Rams in the NFC Championship, that I'm seeing them as the favorites to win the Super Bowl. But I mean, the Patriots, they obviously show up, play hard for Mike Vrabel. Drake May's been phenomenal all season. But I mean, it's just gonna be tough. Jackson Smith and Jigba, obviously he's gonna go up against Christian Gonzalez. That's gonna be a fun matchup to watch. I think the big factor is gonna be for the Patriots is how they get their run game going. Obviously, Drake May, can scramble around as needed as he did, in the Snow Bowl against the Broncos in that second half. Kind of ensure that they were able to, maintain the lead and obviously win that game. But uh, you know, Stevenson, I forget his first name, but Stevenson and Travion Henderson are going to be integral to this game against the Seahawks. That run game. Um, Stephon Diggs is going to be huge in this game. Austin Hooper. Yeah, I think just overall, that Pats offense against the Seahawks defense is just going to be interesting. But like I said, my early thoughts, Seahawks are going to win it, and Bad Bunny is going to have a phenomenal show. I think we forget that Bad Bunny is the halftime show this year. That should be a fun one as well. But yeah, that should be a fun Super Bowl next week. And we'll see obviously who comes out on top. Hopefully looking at the Super Bowl 61, hopefully it's, my Atlanta Falcons. Obviously, we've made a lot of moves in the early parts of the offseason. Like to look at it, of course. We got our head coach, Kevin Stefanski, Coach Ski, as I like to call him now. Gotta give him a name to, fit with it in Atlanta. But yeah, Coach Stefanski, leading the helm as coach. We got our DC Bear Obert back, Tom and Reese coming with Stefanski as our OC. And, we got Matt as, president of football at the top. And then we got our GM, Ian Cunningham, coming from the Bears, who's assistant GM there, has a great track record, worked with Ozzie Newsome in Baltimore and Howie in Philly. I want to say, yeah, I think so as well. So he's, been a part of, Super Bowl winning organizations. Excited to see what the organization now that I feel like we have the right pieces in play at the top. How do we, build this team? Because we got a lot of talent in Atlanta. From obviously on the offensive side of the ball, Bijan, best player in the league, for sure. Drake London. Do we bring back Kyle Pitts? I think I talked about that last time. And then as well as what other moves? I think it obviously we got to get a second wide receiver next to Drake London, wide receiver two, for sure. Obviously, we know the quarterback situation, with Michael Penix's health, and how does he, choose, obviously going to bounce back, coming off that ACL, that ACL tear on his other knee. Our defense, young, hungry, defense that showed out this year with 57 sacks. But we got young talent on that team: Jalen Walker, Xavier Watts. Vets. Obviously, do we bring back Caden Ellis? We got AJ Terrell. At cornerback one. Do we bring another cornerback in the draft? In this upcoming draft, obviously we don't have a first round pick because we traded it for Chase Pierce Jr. to the Rams. But James Pierce Jr. was a baller, had 10 and a half sacks, looking to be a potential defensive rookie of the year this year. Xavier Watts balled out. We got Jesse Bates, vet back there as well, at the safety spot. So we got we got good mix of pieces on the offensive and defensive side of the ball that I think, like I said, we brought Jeff Over back on our defense. It should, consistently remain solid. Most notably, we brought Nate Ollie back. Love that as our D line coach. So it should help definitely our defense continue to build that continuity and continue to grow in that sense. For offensive side of the ball, I think obviously biggest question is quarterback and how do we utilize the weapons and put them in the right spot to succeed. And I think that's going to be integral heading into the draft, OTAs, mini camps, and obviously come training camp, preseason, and regular season, next year. But it should be exciting. Excited to see what we continue to do in Atlanta. And then, yeah, that's I'm excited. Excited what my Falcons have done. I really like, the moves. A lot of people were hesitant about, Coach Stefanski, but I think he'll be solid. I was initially hesitant as well, obviously coming from an organization like Cleveland, the Browns, but to be a coach that, was a two-time coach of the year. Not saying, that's obviously the most, you know, notable accomplishments because we see coaches of the year, get fired, of course. But I think two times coach of the year in Cleveland with their whirlwind, quarterback situation for sure over there. But when they were stable at the quarterback position, their team did well. And of course, could say the same issues, with the Falcons, of course, obviously with our quarterback situation right now, knowing with Penix, he is of course the future. But of course, depending on his health, how long, and then more than likely we're getting off Kirk Cousins' contract. I did see reports that the NFL salary cap was supposed to increase by, I think it was at like 279 last year, and it's supposed to hit like 300 now this year. So that huge increase. I want to say reports came out like 300, 305. It should be the cap for each team this year, which we're going to see a lot of record-breaking contracts this offseason across the league at a number of different positions. So we'll have, some money to work with in that sense to, continue developing, build our team, into a Super Bowl, contending team. Hopefully it's, for Super Bowl 61, but obviously as long as we ain't been in the playoffs in a while, let's just get to the playoffs first and go from there for sure. And then, we're closing out, obviously we want to get into the top four. But by been listening to Don Tolliver's Octane, Fire, Body, Sweet Home. Wow, I'm blanking on a couple other tracks, but those are really my two top two tracks for sure from that. body of work from Don Toliver that recently came out yesterday. Um, Birthday Blues by J. Cole, fire. Been listening to that mixtape by Cole. The fall off is coming on 2/6. Stop asking. Excited to hear the fall off coming out soon. Dang, I'm so excited for the fall off, guys. I like there's two things you can't change my mind about, and it's I was telling somebody this. It's Kobe Bryant's my goat when it comes to basketball, the NBA. Can't change my mind. Kobe's my goat, number one, and then J Cole is my goat when it comes to music. Obviously, have a huge affinity in my love for for Drake, but Cole's my goat when it comes to music for sure. But yeah, and I'm just so excited for what seems to be, obviously, uh, a good close to this chapter for Cole in terms of with his music. Just to know, obviously, from 2/6, he's from Fayetteville. The I was coming out, 2/6, 26. It's a double disc album looking like it's probably gonna be 26 tracks, 26 out of 26. Uh it's just so interesting, but I just know, obviously, we see, from the cover, alternate cover notes that he sent out of how he got reinvigorated and re-inspired, from the 7-minute drill, how he deleted that from, might delete later, and all the, backlash he got for that track, taking the apology back. But to see how, hungry and inspired he is it's just dope and exciting to hear the music for sure. In that, what have I been watching? Tehran on Apple TV, fire show. What else have I been watching? Miss Pat show. Love me the Miss Pat show. Been watching that. BET Plus. What else? What else have I been watching? Obviously, finished the Upshaws. This courtesy of the Upshaws did recently finish that. And just watching my shows, Abbott Elementary, like new shows I added recently, like Animal Patrol and things like that. Wait, so yeah, it's been some fun watches. And then what am I looking forward to? Oh, what am I looking forward to? What am I looking forward to? Um, oh no, no, no. Before I get to what I'm looking forward to, what I got currently going on? Surviving this snowstorm, of course. But yeah, just you know, working on planning my birthday trip. Got some. Yeah, just excited for just figuring things out. Day by day. And yes, going, throughout my day. But then also what I'm looking forward to, like I said, just excited for what's ahead. Headed into February as the year progresses along. And to see first off, the year's already flying by. It's insane that we're already at the end of January. But yeah, just what's ahead for me. In terms of with everything. Professionally, personally. Excited for all of that. Like I said, excited for the trips ahead. Excited for the the connections set to be made. The connections not yet made. But yeah, definitely definitely looking forward to all the adventures. Set set that I'm set to have my sights on for sure. But as always, I appreciate y'all. Always like I always say, listening to me ramble for sure. I always appreciate it. Appreciate y'all, tapping in as always. Uh, until the next time, peace.